last 15 minutes, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted Edmund Zagorski a reprieve from execution. He was set to die tonight. Governor Haslam said in a statement he is delaying that execution for 10 days. Here's what he said in part: given the federal court's decision to honor Zagorski's last-minute decision to choose electrocution as the method of execution, this brief reprieve will give all involved the time necessary to carry out the sentence in an orderly and careful manner. The state had previously denied Zagorski's request to use the electric chair instead of lethal injection. But today a judge said Tennessee must follow that inmate's wishes. You can weigh in right now on the choice that inmates, at least some of them, have about how to die at WBIR.com/vote or in the WBIR app. Many of you voting as we speak. And as you do that, we're going to talk more about this case and what it means as far as execution in the state. We're returning to our conversation with former Chief Justice Gary Wade. And Justice Wade, what do you make of the governor's actions late today?
Oh, I compliment the governor for having interceded. This had become a procedural mess with what has taken place over the last 48 hours with at least one application for relief pending in the United States Supreme Court, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals action suggesting that there should be a stay, and now in the district court there being a restraining order there suggesting that electrocution is the method that the defendant has chosen. And so I think this is really a very helpful process, because clearly the Department of Correction will now have plenty of time to make all of the preparations they need to make, and if in fact this results in his being electrocuted.
Stepping back to our question about the choice that some Tennessee inmates have, give us some background on why some can choose their method of execution in this state.
Well, the statute provides that all of those convicted before 1999 may choose either electrocution, which has been upheld by the United States Supreme Court, is perfectly constitutional, or lethal injection, which is the method today utilized for all of those sentenced to death after 1999. So it is a little bit different in that there's a choice for most of those whose cases are ripe to be placed in the point of execution.
You mentioned that we may be in the same place we are tonight 10 days from now, despite this reprieve. Why is that?
Well, I think the reprieve puts it off for 10 days. Of course, the Tennessee Supreme Court has the right to set the execution date, but I see the effect of this reprieve as just moving this 10 days forward. And unless the Supreme Court acts to be more definitive in the time of the execution, I think this will hold steady the course.
And lastly, does it portend any other reaction about new death penalty cases to come? Will this influence anything in the future, the trouble we have seen with this case legally?
Well, Miller, who is the longest standing on death row now, will be next up in early December. And it could be that many of the same actions are taken in his case as opposed to Zagorski. He may, however, prefer to be executed by the lethal injection unless there's some intervening change in either his conviction or his sentence between now and then. Of course, the governor can play a role in that case. Likewise, the United States Supreme Court and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the District Court in Nashville, or any one of the courts in Tennessee could intervene, but ultimately it'll end up in the United States Supreme Court.
Former Tennessee Chief Justice Gary Wade, also the Dean of the LMU School of Law, thank you for your perspective once again today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.